For centuries, storms at sea have been among a sailor's worst fears. Tempests, typhoons, and hurricanes have sent countless ships to the bottom. In the age of wooden sailing ships, a howling storm could snap masts, flood decks, and send even the sturdiest vessel to a watery grave. Today, however, the United States Navy's nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, colossal steel leviathans over 1,000 feet long, are far better equipped to handle nature's fury. But as robust as they are, even these giants must respect the power of the sea. In today's video, we'll uncover the tactics and design that let U.S. carriers endure brutal storms, and what happens when nature still pushes them to the limit. If you're grateful for our brave Naval Forces service, who face these dangers at full speed, type grateful in the comments below. An American aircraft carrier is essentially a floating city and one of the largest moving structures ever built. A Nimitz-class or new Ford-class carrier can weigh around 100,000 tons at full load and stretch over 3 football fields in length. This sheer size is a first line of defense against rough seas. Mass matters. A huge ship will not react as violently to waves as a smaller one. Basically, a carrier's primary weapon against excess rolling is their sheer size, which lets it shrug off all but the most extreme waves. In practical terms, a wave that might send a small boat heaving and rolling will only gently sway a 100,000-ton carrier. The ship's immense weight and wide beam, width, give it a low center of gravity and great stability, making it highly resistant to capsizing even in angry seas. A former Navy meteorology commander, David Titley, noted that U.S. Navy ships and carriers are designed and built to withstand heavy weather and do so on a routine basis. The carrier's design features further enhance its sea-keeping prowess. The hull beneath the water is deep and broad, with a draft of nearly 40 feet and built-in curvature that helps soften the impact of waves. Unlike civilian cruise ships, U.S. carriers do not rely on active stabilizer fins or gyroscopes to reduce roll. They generally don't need them. Instead, they have bilge keels, long fin-like ridges along the bottom, to dampen rolling, and the rest is accomplished by pure size and smart design. The bow of a carrier is usually bulbous and flared, designed to cut through waves and deflect water away. These ships also sit high out of the water. The flight deck of a U.S. carrier towers roughly 55 to 65 feet above the waves. This high freeboard means that even in fierce storms, it's rare for waves to sweep across the flight deck. A truly monstrous wave can still send water splashing up the bow. There are dramatic photos of older carriers like USS Kitty Hawk plowing into huge swells. But such cases are unusual. In short, an aircraft carrier's huge size, weight, and design give it a major advantage in rough seas, acting like a stable island in the storm. Critically, these warships are also built with robust, watertight construction. The hull is subdivided into many compartments sealed by heavy doors. In preparation for heavy weather, the crew secures the ship by closing these watertight hatches, essentially turning the carrier into a sealed, airtight steel box to prevent flooding. The massive steel flight deck, which on U.S. carriers is not only the takeoff touch landing surface, but also a structural strength deck, is built to take punishment. It won't be easily buckled by waves or wind. All electronics, weapons, and critical systems are secured inside the hardened hull. The carrier's nuclear reactors and propulsion are deep below the waterline, keeping weight low and ensuring continuous power even in chaos. Together, all these features mean a U.S. carrier can safely ride out conditions that would wreck smaller vessels. No ship is truly unsinkable, of course, and extreme forces could damage even a carrier. But by design, these giants can deal with nearly any wave that comes along, as long as Mother Nature doesn't throw something truly unprecedented at them. One of the biggest advantages modern carriers have over the warships of the past is foreknowledge. If a hostile storm is brewing, the carrier will usually know about it well in advance. The U.S. Navy employs onboard meteorologists, often called aerographers, and receives detailed weather forecasts, satellite data, and radar updates at sea. In fact, today's carriers carry sophisticated systems like the Hazardous Weather Detection and Display Capability Radar, which gives real-time storm tracking and alerts. The best strategy in a hurricane or typhoon is not to be there at all, and Navy ships take this to heart. They will adjust course and speed to avoid the worst part of a storm whenever possible. A naval architect describing carrier operations explained that a carrier's secondary defense is strategic routing. Essentially, if you aren't where the waves are, you won't respond to them. The U.S. fleet will closely monitor storm systems and guide their ships along safer waters or around the storm's path. These proactive measures alone spare carriers from having to directly face nature's full wrath in most cases. Unlike ships of old that were at the mercy of sudden tempests, an aircraft carrier strike group can usually see trouble coming and get out of the way. U.S. carriers are surprisingly fast for their size. They can sustain over 30 knots when needed. This means a carrier can dash hundreds of miles within a day to evade a hurricane's projected track. A Navy Admiral, Christopher Grady, emphasized this advantage when Hurricane Florence approached the U.S. East Coast in 2018. Rather than keeping ships in port to ride it out, the Navy ordered its carriers and dozens of other ships out to sea to escape the storm's approach. Our ships can better weather storms of this magnitude when they are underway, Admiral Grady explained. At sea, a carrier has open room to maneuver and won't be smashed against a pier or shoreline. Navy officials directed the ships to positions best postured for storm avoidance in the Atlantic. This is standard procedure. Whenever a major storm threatens a fleet base, the massive carriers will sail out, a sortie condition, to either outrun the storm or steer well clear of the most dangerous quadrants. With modern tracking, it's very rare for a U.S. carrier to be caught off guard by a hurricane or typhoon the way ships were in bygone eras. Even when a carrier must contend with rough weather, it will try to choose the most favorable way to meet the seas. The bridge team can adjust the ship's heading relative to the wind and waves, typically pointing the bow into oncoming swells. Taking waves head-on minimizes the rolling motion, side to side, and instead produces a gentler pitching motion up and down that such hulls are designed to handle. The carrier might also reduce speed to lessen the impact when crashing into big waves, or sometimes increase speed just enough to maintain steerage and stability. It's a careful balance, like a dance with the ocean's rhythm. The carrier's escorts, destroyers, cruisers, etc., will do the same. In fact, a carrier group usually has to consider its smallest ships. They cannot charge through a storm faster than the escorting destroyers can handle, so the whole group will avoid conditions the smaller vessels can't safely survive. Carriers might be nearly invulnerable to big waves, but the 9,000-ton destroyer next to it is not, so the Navy plans accordingly. Inevitably, there are times when an aircraft carrier must sail through rough seas or when a storm hits with little warning. The open ocean can be unpredictable. Sudden squalls, high winds, and towering waves can challenge even a supercarrier. When heavy weather is unavoidable, the crew goes into full storm preparation mode. Long before the storm arrives, the carrier's crew secures the ship for sea. This means battening down every hatch and door, bracing or stowing loose equipment, and making sure the entire ship is buttoned up tight. On the flight deck and hangar decks, sailors use heavy chains to tie down each aircraft, sometimes with more points of restraint than usual. U.S. Navy carriers have specific heavy weather tie-down requirements, essentially doubling the chains and chocks used to secure each plane. An experienced Navy oceanographer, Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, described sailing through 40-foot waves and noted, "We always double-chained the aircraft down and never lost one." Everything from radar dishes to helicopters is similarly secured or moved below. The carrier's island windows are shut and shielded, and non-essential crews stay off the decks. Essentially, the ship hunkers down like a turtle retracting into its shell. As the seas build, the carrier's captain and bridge officers continuously adjust the ship's course and speed to ride the waves as safely as possible. The carrier might zigzag into the wind or take waves at a slight angle to reduce repetitive stress on the bow. Inside the ship, the crew feels the vessel pitch and roll, but a carrier's motions are relatively slow and gentle compared to a small ship in the same sea. Veteran sailors often report that while a destroyer in a storm might be tossing violently, sometimes literally surfing down waves, the big carrier just lurched and rocked a little bit, more like an oversized rocking chair at sea. That said, the flight deck can still become a dangerous place. Heavy winds gusting over 70+ knots or sudden rolls can pose risks. During flight operations, such conditions are usually a showstopper. Carriers will suspend aircraft launch and recovery if deck movements or wind shear exceed safe limits. As an example, trying to land jets on a deck that is heaving several meters up and down in a squall is a white-knuckle proposition. It's avoided unless absolutely necessary, and modern carriers have motion-stabilized landing systems to help when conditions are marginal. Despite all precautions, nature can still surprise even the U.S. Navy. A vivid recent example occurred in July 2022 aboard the USS Harry S. Truman. The carrier was conducting a resupply in the Mediterranean when a sudden bout of severe weather struck. In an extremely rare incident, the combination of roaring wind and the ship's roll managed to sweep a parked FA-18 Super Hornet fighter jet off the flight deck and into the sea. Fortunately, no one was in the jet at the time, but it stunned many observers because such an event is almost unheard of outside of combat. Navy officials described the weather as unexpected heavy weather, and an investigation suggested a sudden microburst downdraft may have hit the ship. This is an extremely unusual event, Commander Titley emphasized, noting that carriers and their aircraft are built to handle rough weather routinely. In normal practice, if a big storm is expected, everything on deck is chained down or moved indoors, precisely to prevent accidents. The incident on Truman was termed bizarre by outside analysts, a testament to how well carriers usually cope with nature's extremes that were shocked when a single jet goes overboard. The damaged Pride and the lost $50 million jet aside, the Truman itself and the rest of its air wing came through that surprise gale just fine. It shows that while carriers are incredibly resilient, they're not invincible, and the seamanship and caution remain vital. Within the armored hull, the crew endures the storm with training and teamwork. Modern warships actually treat heavy weather as a training scenario in many ways, a sort of natural stress test. Sailors report that a big storm at sea can feel like combat light, since everyone is at a high state of readiness and the ship is sealed up as it would be in battle. In fact, heavy weather drills are common in the Navy. Crews practice securing for sea, handling flooding or power losses, and navigating when Mother Nature throws a punch. It's often said that if it's not bolted down, it's going to move when a ship rolls. And carriers have a lot of stuff that could turn into projectiles if not secured. Thus, discipline and stowage is part of everyday life. During truly bad weather, the captain might order the crew to stay in their berths or workstation unless absolutely needed to prevent injuries from falls. Non-essential operations pause. Everyone waits out the storm as the carrier takes the beating and gives one back to the waves with its 1,100-foot-long armored belly. By the time skies clear, the flight deck might be slick with salt and the ship could have minor dings, maybe some deck equipment torn loose or an antenna bent. But the carrier will be largely unharmed and ready to resume operations. A former carrier sailor once quipped that being on a U.S. supercarrier in a storm felt like riding a freight train through an earthquake, a lot of vibration and noise. But you had confidence the machine would plow through intact. One could say there's a healthy respect for nature's power ingrained in Navy culture. The U.S. Navy's approach to storms is a blend of confidence and caution. They have confidence that the supercarrier can take a punch. These ships can roll 20+ degrees and still recover, or plow through a wall of water and emerge on the other side. But they are cautious to never underestimate the weather. They'll avoid the punch altogether if they can, and they train incessantly for damage control in case something goes wrong. Modern aircraft carriers essentially carry on a long naval tradition. Prepare for the worst, and the ship will see you through.